So before I begin this, I just want to mention that this save system will be getting created for a listed server. So for dedicated servers, the location of storing this information probably will need to be some kind of an external one or something like that, because right now we're going to use the host character so that he would hold this information, because we don't have any dedicated server on here or any other remote outside database. So our only location is the host player for this. So that's where we're going to store all of these buildables. So for that, first we need a structure which is going to actually hold our values for us that we need to save. And to save a bit of a time, I'm going to just duplicate the SBuildable structure. There are a couple of extra variables that we don't really need to save, but we do need a lot of these variables that are inside of here, like mesh, destructible mesh, health, and all that stuff. So let's call this saved builds. And let's open this up because we need some additional variables as well. So we have all the same variables, and I'm going to add a couple of new ones. So the first one is going to be build ID. We're going to need that one. So we're going to go ahead and change that into a regular integer. Let's add another variable, and this one is going to be is finished, which is going to represent whether our build is finished or not. So we're going to save that one as well. And also we are going to go ahead and save the transform of our build. So we have our transform and the transform type. There we go. So that's good. We have the structure, and this is all that we will need in this structure as of right now. Now the next thing that we need is to actually create the save file, which is going to store this information for us. So we're going to right click, look for a blueprint class, and search for save game. We're going to create a new one. I'm going to call this build save. Let's open this one up, and inside of here let's add ourselves a variable which is actually going to store these buildables. So I'm just going to call this buildables, and the structure type for this, well, the variable type for this is our newly created structure called saved builds. And we also got to make sure that this variable right here is an array. There we go. So now this thing will be able to store all that stuff for us. Now also I'm going to go ahead and inside of this build save, I'm going to add a function, because whenever we are going to remove a buildable, we are going to need to look for it. So we're going to need to find it so that we can remove it from our database whenever we destroy it, so it does not reappear the next time we join the game. So let's create a function, and let's call this find buildable. Like so. Now this thing right here is going to need two inputs. So I'm going to add two inputs. The first one is going to be the class, because we need some kind of parameters that we can compare so that we know this is the correct buildable, so that we know how to find it. So I'm going to have a class. So I'm going to look for a actor, and I'm going to hover over this so it gives me a class reference, not the object reference, but the class reference. And also we need I'm going to use a transform. So these are going to be the two conditions that I'm going to be comparing to make sure that I have found the correct buildable inside of our save game. So then we can go ahead, grab our buildables, and we can do a loop for each with a break. We can go through all of these like so. Now from here, let's go ahead and let's break our array element rather. And here we want to check for two things. So the first thing is we want to check whether the actor is equal to the class. So I'm just going to right click and get class, and at the very bottom there should be a get class variable, which is the one from our input. And then also we want to check whether the transform is equal, well, actually nearly equal, because sometimes there are tiny bit of differences. Sometimes it's weird with mostly with rotations. So I'm just going to give this some tiny error tolerance of like 1 1 1, and that's it. There we go. Now we need to provide the B. So we have the A, which is the stored transform, and also the one that we pass along. So we're going to right click and get transform, and again at the very bottom there should be a variable called get transform, which is the one from our inputs, and we can plug into the B route. So now we are checking whether the class matches up and also whether the transform matches up. So we're going to do a AND from both of these booleans like so, And then from our execution route, we can go ahead and do an if branch check to see if that condition, well, if both of these conditions are true. So basically whether the class matches up and whether the transform matches up. Now, if that is true, we're going to do a sequence because we're going to do two tasks. First, we are going to go ahead and return. So add a return node. And then from this return node, we need to pass along a output, which is going to be called found. So that it basically informs us whether we found a buildable. And also we're going to add another parameter, which is going to be the index value for this buildable. So the one from the buildables save array. So we have both of those. So now for the found, we want to set this to be true. And for the index, we want to plug in the index from our loops array index, like so. Now I'm going to do some small reroute right here. So it goes around. Here we go. We have that all good. And now from the then one, so we're going to return true. And from then one, we're going to go ahead and break our loop afterwards. So it just stops looping. We don't need it to continue going on because we already found what we were looking for. And then from the completion of the loop, we're just simply again going to add a return node and leave it empty. Make sure that it's just false. That's the most important part. Other than that, that is the whole function, which is going to help us find buildables in our saved array. So that's good. Now we can go ahead and forget about this. Everything is already set up in here that we are going to set up inside of this save build. So you can go ahead and close it off. Now, the next thing would be to open up our buildables master. So let's go ahead, let's open it up and let's set up the functionality for us to save and delete actors from the save. So I'm going to add a new function for this and I'm going to call this save actor. And from here, first we need to do a couple of checks. So the first one is we need to check, does save game exist? So we want to make sure that the save game actually exists before we save to it, because if it doesn't, we need to create it. So we're going to create an if branch check to see what's going on. Now we also need to provide a slot name. For this, I'm just going to call build save. And there we go. So that's good. And the next thing, so if it's false, then I'm going to go ahead and create a save game object. And the class for this is our created build save. So this guy right here. Now from the true route, we can go ahead and if the save game exists, we can load game from a slot like so. And let's provide the exact same name. So we again need to provide that it is a build save. There we go. Now we need to go ahead and promote this guy to a local variable. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to create a local variable and I'm going to plug in, do it from the top one. Don't make a mistake like I just did. Make sure you create it from the top one. Create a local variable, because this one is going to create you a save game and this one is going to create you a build save. We don't want to specify a specific save at this point. So connect this one and I'm going to call this local save game, because if we create this as a save game rather than build save that we created on our own, because this is the default class in Unreal Engine, we are able to plug any other save class that is a child of the default save game inside of this variable. So we can store any of these two. So the one that maybe we already have, or we can just go ahead and create a new one like so. There we go. So that's good. Now the next thing that we need to do is go ahead and cast to our actual save. So we want to cast to build save from both of these routes, because we just created a local variable which we can then use as the object reference like so. So now it's going to find the variable for us. Let me actually do some reroute. There we go. Okay, so that's good. Now that we have done this, we can go ahead and try to look up whether we have this buildable inside of our saves already, because we are going to initiate the save every time we add a resource. So this is going to get saved automatically and instantly, and every time we add a resource, this is going to save it, and we got to make sure that we don't add any new extra instances in this save. Otherwise, we're going to create duplicate builds. So what I'm going to do first is go ahead and I'm going to find a buildable. That's the first thing that I'm going to do. I'm going to look for a buildable. Now for the class, I'm going to do self first. So we are inside of a buildable. So we're going to save ourselves. And then from here, we're going to get a class. Get class and plug that into the class variable like so. Now for the transform, we can go ahead and right click and get actor transform. And that can be our transform value like so. So those are provided. Now let's go ahead and let's do an if branch check to see if we found this inside of our database, because if we haven't, we got to go ahead and save it. If we have it already, we got to modify it. So let's start off with, let's just add it. So if it's false, then let's go ahead and drag from our build save, and we're going to get buildables. And from here, we're going to go ahead and just simply add at the bottom, like so. Now I'm going to do some small rewrites again because we're going to need that value again. Now for this add, we got to drag from the structure, and we want to break this because we want to provide all of these values that we have over here. Now the first thing is grabbing the buildable variable that we have inside of this specific buildable. We can get that, break it, and provide all the values. So we have the mesh, trace, actor, resource, destructible, health, avoid adding child, and items like so. So we are saving all the same variables that we have in this structure, and also we're going to provide these values as well. So we want to provide the build ID, that's going to be necessary on load. We want to again check if it's finished, also very necessary on load, so that we know whether whether the build is finished or not. And for the transform, we can do what we just did up here. We can just right click and get actor transform and plug that in. There we go. So now if we don't have this buildable inside of our save game, then well, it's going to add it. Now if we do have one, then from the buildables, we want to go ahead and set its array element. So on true, we're going to set an array element, and then we can provide the index value from our find buildable because we found it and we want to modify it. And the item actually is exactly the same item that we provided to the add. So both of these are going to use the same structure because, well, the data doesn't change. The data stays the same. It's just simply that we already had it. We just now need to basically update it. Now, the last thing that we need to do is go ahead and actually save this because we just set it, but we actually need to save it to the slot as well. So I'm going to go ahead and drag from the cast of the build save. And here I'm going to go ahead and save game to slot. And I'm going to do this from both of these execution routes whenever we modified or added a new instance. Now again, of course, just like always, I'm going to do a little bit of a reroute. Otherwise, this thing is overlapping quite a bit already. And also make sure that you provide, again, the same exact slot name that you provided in both of these fields as well. And that is called build save in my case. Now, so we are good with saving this. So now we have our save function ready to go. And now, obviously, the next function that we need to add is removing from the save. So I'm going to again add a new function, and I'm going to call this remove from save. And over here, we're going to do very similar things. So first, we're going to check, does save game exist? But it should exist at this point already, because otherwise, well, we probably will save something first, and then we're going to remove from it. But just in case, we're going to do, does save exist? Check if add the slot name, build save. Check if that save actually exists, so true or false. Now if it's false, we don't do anything, we don't have the same save, so there's nothing really to delete from. But if it does, we're going to go ahead and load game from slot. We're going to load our build save, and very similar to what we did in our save actor, we're going to go ahead and, whoops, didn't mean to double click that. We're going to cast to our build save. And from here, first we are going to go ahead and find the buildable so that we know which one we actually need to remove. Again, we got to get the class. So I'm going to do self, and from self, I'm going to get class. It's going to return me the class of this specific buildable, and then right click, get actor transform, and plug in the transform value like so. Then we can go ahead and do an if branch check to make sure that we actually found something, because if we didn't, there's nothing that we can remove. But if we did, if that is true, then from the build save, we're going to get our buildables. And from this array, we're just simply going to go ahead and remove an index on the true route like so. Again, small bit of reroute, connect the indexes like so. And then once we are done, we again got to make sure that we save this information so it doesn't get lost. So from the as build save, we're going to go ahead and save game to the slot like so. Again, a little bit of a reroute, and make sure to provide the same slot name again. So it's going to be the build save. Now, obviously, if you have multiple maps, you want to make multiple saves, then you might want to provide an array, and depending on in which slot you are right now. But I'm going to be using only one, so I'm going to be sticking with just one name throughout this whole thing. So this is all good, ready to go. So now let's implement these, and inside of our event graph, let's look for the first location, which is going to be our event set mesh. But, well, we do need to add some things to this, because we are going to be using this whenever we place it for the first time down, and also we are going to be using this event whenever we load the actor, and we don't want to save it once more. We just want to save it once, and we don't want to save it when we load it. We only want to save it when we place it. So I'm going to go ahead and double click this to open up the build interface, and for this interface function, I'm going to add another input, and I'm going to call this should save, and that is going to be a Boolean value. So we can go ahead, compile and save this, go back inside of our build master, and then from this should save, after the multi-set mesh, we're going to do an if branch check to see if we need to save this, and then from here we're going to do a delay of 0.02 seconds, and this is just so that there is enough time for the PC to run this code. Otherwise, it's not going to save the correct materials. We got to make sure that it first sets these, and then we want to go ahead and save this. 0.02 seconds will be definitely enough. I think even less should be enough, but you will see no difference. It's going to be just good. But we just got to make sure that this variable right here gets set first before we can actually save this. So after this delay, we're going to go ahead and save the actor like so. Now we're going to deal with the input in a bit. Let's just set up our locations of these save functions. Now the next one would be inside of our event interact with build whenever we add resources through this. So what I'm going to do is drag this save actor in. I'm going to set it from this false, so that's basically we add a resource. We didn't finish it, but we did add a resource, so we're going to go ahead and store that information so it doesn't get lost. And also, whenever we finish it, we're also going to go ahead and save it, but make sure to do it after you set this variable, because that is very important. As you can see over here, from our multi-finish build, we don't set any variables, we change materials, which is a different story. We got to make sure that we are setting the variables first before we save the information, because we got to know the updated information of this. So that is all good. Now we also need to remove from the save, and that we can do wherever we are destroying our build. So whenever we destroy the build over here, I'm going to do that before the delay. I'm going to go ahead and remove from save on this loop's completion before we destroy the actor itself. I'm going to do this before the delay because obviously if the actor has been destroyed, we want to go ahead and make sure that we actually remove it, because let's say we do it over here, that means that whenever you can see the destruction happen in the level, you can quit the game real quick, come back in, and the buildable is still going to be there. So we want to make sure that we remove it whenever it is collapsing, not when the rubble gets removed from the map. So I'm going to run mine over here. And that should be it for these functions. Now we should go ahead and actually provide this should save value now. So we can do that inside of our build component. So in our building folder, we have our build component, and on the spawn build, after we actually spawn the actor, we can go ahead and provide this should save to be true. That is very, very important, because, well, we do need to save it whenever we create it. Now later there's going to be a loading phase where we are not going to do that, but here we are creating, so it is very, very necessary. Now also what I'm going to do is actually bring this whole thing down, because we're going to reuse the same function. We're going to have another if branch check over here, but we are going to pretty much reuse the same logic behind this whole thing to respawn these buildables whenever we load the game back in, because obviously when we leave the game, come back in, there's none of this stuff, so we need to make sure that we place this down again. And often in my previous tutorials, also in the easy how to load and save video, I mentioned that the same way as you placed this whole thing inside of the world should be the same place, and should be the same way how you load it back in. So what we are going to essentially do is respawn all of our buildables again. So over here from the false branch, which is whenever we actually when we don't move, because in this case we are not moving, we're going to go ahead and do an if branch check. Now from the false route, we're going to proceed with the previous code, because this is going to check whether we are loading or not. Now if we're not loading, then we can proceed and place all of these things down. Now for this to work, we actually need some more inputs in this. So in the spawn build, I'm going to go ahead and add us a new parameter, and I'm going to call this loading save. There we go. So we're going to have the loading save, and also I'm going to have another input which is going to have the information about all of our buildables, because we're going to do a loop over here. Obviously we could have done a loop in a different location, so I'm going to be using the level blueprint for that to load these buildables in, but obviously we could have done this, we could have done the loop inside of there, but I'm going to be keeping the loop inside of this blueprint. It doesn't really matter that much inside of where we actually keep it. So I'm going to provide this information. So we're going to have our saved builds, and this is going to be our save builds structure, which obviously then needs to be an array if we are doing the loop inside of here. There we go. So now that we have our loading save, for this if branch check, we can go ahead and right click and we can get loading save, and we can go ahead and plug that in. Now at this point, before we proceed with actually loading these things in, let's make sure that we patch things up, because we just added 2 new variables inside of our spawn build, and we got to make sure that we actually provide these values from the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our third person character, because that is where this event is getting launched from, because we have the server one. So we have our server saved build already giving me an error, as you can see. So from here, I'm just going to go ahead and plug that in. And now both of these are available over here. Now what we want to do is, so here we have should save value, which should be left at false, because we are not loading over here. Over here we are adding a new instance, because this is on our left mouse button. But what we got to do over here is we need to provide some kind of an array, because if we compile this, you can see this gives us an error. We don't have anything really to provide, so we can just drag from this, we can make an array, and we can go ahead and right click this 0 and remove array element pin. And now we just provided an empty array, and just make sure that you provide false in here. That is very important, so we don't run the loading script, but rather just simply the placing script. There we go. So this is all patched up and ready to go. Now let's go back to our build component and let's start working on the true route. Now this is going to be a little messy because we have a lot of tasks that we need to do, and I hope I can do some good job when it comes to rerouting, so we can actually see and understand what's going on. Also, I'm going to move this a little away because this script is going to take a little space. So the first thing is we passed along our saved builds, so we can go ahead and get our saved builds, and from here we can do a loop for each. We want to go through the whole thing, and we can plug that into the loading save true route, like so. Now the next thing that we need to do is the first actual task is actually going to be spawn actor from class, because we want to now respawn our buildables. Now we need to provide the two most important informations, the class and the transform. So from the array element, I'm going to go ahead and break this. And from here, I'm going to plug in the transform, and I'm going to plug in the actor class, like so. So that's how this is going to look. Now I'm going to make sure to do some little bit of a rerouting. Now the next part is, just like I previously mentioned, we need to follow the same path pretty much. So again, we need to set the mesh and set the build cost. So we're going to run those. So from here, we're going to set mesh message. So our target is our newly spawned actor, and we need to provide the mesh value. So I'm going to drag from this, and I'm going to plug in the mesh, like so. Now the should save should be left at false, because we are not saving, we are loading right now. So we should leave it at that. And the next one would be to set the build cost message, because again, we want to inform about what resources have been already spent, because maybe maybe the build is not yet finished. So we need to make sure we provide that information as well. And for the buildable, well, we got to make sure that we go ahead and make this like so. So we're going to make one, and we need to pass that information along so we can grab it from our array. So I'm going to do another break another structure and plug in all the values. So the mesh, trace channel, actor class, resources, destructible, health, avoid saving as child, and the items as well, like so. Now we also need to provide the build ID, and we can go ahead and grab it from over here, or we can actually grab it from the bottom. It doesn't matter, that's the same structure. So we're going to grab it from over here, because this way I think it's going to be a little less overlapping routes. So that is good. Now the next thing is we need to actually create us a new interface, which is going to tell the build that is actually being finished, and this way it's going to be a little bit easier as if we just set up a interface. We could do some more math and some more logic, but I think this way is going to be a little bit easier. So we can go ahead and reopen our build interface, and over here add us a new function and call this set is build finished. Oh my god, can't type. Set is build finished, and provide this a single input, which is finished boolean value. Compile and save this. Let's go back to our build component, and from here again, from the spawned actor, we can go ahead and set is build finished message and plug that in. Small reroute, and plug in the is finished from our saved builds structure, just like the ID. There we go. So that is all good. Now we do need to provide some more information. So we need to reset our parenting and child logic. Now this is going to be a little weird because obviously we cannot store really, we don't know in which order these are going to be saved. We can't really store the whole actor references, because those will be changing when we are going to delete them and respawn them whenever we rejoin the game. So we need to figure out some kind of a method how we can detect who is the parent of whom, basically. And for that, I'm going to do some line tracing. So after we set whether the build is finished or not, we're going to do an if branch check, because we want to check whether this build that we just spawned actually does care about having children or not. So we're going to go ahead and grab our avoid adding as child, like this. So we're going to add that value over here. And then if it's false, if we don't want to avoid it, then we're going to go ahead and do us a line trace by channel, like so. Now we need to provide a couple of things. So the first one is we need to make sure that we are ignoring ourselves, so we don't collide with our own actor. So we're going to drag from the ignore actors to ignore. We're going to go ahead and make an array. Now we only need one entry, and that is the actor that we just spawned. So that's going to be the value that we are going to provide for this. Now the next thing that we need is the start and end position. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and drag from our transform. I'm going to split this, and I'm going to plug in the location in the start, And for the end, I'm going to grab the location and do a vector minus vector. And I'm going to remove some kind of an amount of units from this, from the z-axis. So I'm going to shoot from the top down. And I'm going to say, let's remove like 500 units in the z-axis. That should be totally enough. Now from there, from the return value, we can go ahead and do an if branch check to see if we actually collided with something. And then if we did, we can go ahead and add build child message. There we go. Now the actor is the actor that we just spawned. So we want to provide this value right here. So let's do that. And I'm going to actually do it like this. It's a bit of rerouting, looks maybe a little bit better. And then the target is actually the result from our hit result from our line trace. So our hit actor is going to be the target that is going to receive this actor as a child. So this was probably a little bit complicated. Hopefully not. Hopefully you managed to follow along and understand what's actually going on in here. And now we can go ahead and run this whole thing, try to see what's happening. Now obviously this isn't going to work exactly perfect at this point. We still need some tiny little adjustments here and there, but let's go ahead and let's open up our blueprint and let's open up our level blueprint, because this is where we are actually going to initiate the load. So let's go ahead and run this over here on event begin play. So whenever we start the game, we are going to make sure we run this. Now, since I'm doing the replication part, I'm gonna have to make sure that I do a switch has authority, so only the server would run this. The clients don't need to run this because the whole information is stored on the server, and he is the only one that actually needs to load this stuff. So if it has authority, that means it is the server, and we can go ahead and cast to our character. Cast our third-person character. That's the default character that I'm using. And for the object, we can go ahead and get player character with an index 0, and that is going to be our host. Now from here, what we want to do is just simply promote this to a variable, and I'm going to call this host so that we can access this easier, so we don't need to drag long routes for this. Now the next thing is to check, does save game exist? We want to make sure that our save game actually exists. And again, our save game slot name was build save. And from there, we can do an if branch check to make sure that we have actually something to load. Now, if we do, then we're going to go ahead and load game from the slot. Again, the same name, build save. And from here, we can go ahead and cast to our build save to retrieve all the information that is necessary. Now, from here, what we're actually going to do is first grab our host. And as our host, we want to make sure that we run our server spawn build, because the server needs to go ahead and spawn all of these buildables. Now, we need to pass along a couple of these values. We don't need all of them, but we do need a couple of them. So the first one that we need is we need to go ahead and make sure that we pass along the component. So from our host, we need to get a build component. We want to pass that along, and also we want to make sure that we pass along our saved builds. So from our as build save, we want to make sure that we get our buildables and we plug those in. And the last thing, the most important one, is that now on loading save, we want to make sure that we do check this to be true, because at this point we are loading. We are not saving, we are loading. And this gives us an error for the database, so we can go ahead and make this. So I'm going to make an array, right click on the entry, remove it, compile and save this, and we are good to go. So let's try to experiment with this. Like I said, this isn't going to work exactly perfect right now, but hopefully we can get something going. So I'm going to have 3 clients on this one. So we're going to have 3 clients. Let's hit play and let's start experimenting with this. Now I'm going to go ahead and as a client, I'm going to place down the first build, which is going to be this one. And I'm going to place down this one and this one. So we have 3 builds over here. So let's go ahead, let's hit escape. And let's hit play once more. If we come back, interestingly enough, only one build got saved, the rest of them were not. I know where the issue lies. The issue lies inside of those unique buildables, because inside of some of them, they have some additional code unique for themselves. So let's go ahead and let's go through all of them, except for the build window, because again, for the build window, it's not in the build master, so we're going to have to recreate that functionality for it as well. So let's just open up all of these, hit enter, and let's go through all of them. So we have the build door, which has this piece of code, but what it is missing is over here on set mesh, we never pass along the should save, so it never gets saved. So we got to make sure we pass that along. And the same issue will happen in our build foundation. We got to make sure that we pass that along from the child to the parent class. Otherwise, well, it's not going to save it for us. So now if we try this again, you will see that here we go. We have that buildable, but well, we have some issues with the textures, but don't worry about it too much. We're going to fix that in a second. Now, what we got to make sure though is that we go ahead and finish this build off, because it's not finished. So just to experiment with this and make sure it works, you can see it still takes the resources, and there we go. So now it is good. Now what we want to do, I think I don't have any collision over there. So what we want to do is try to destroy this. So we're going to go ahead and destroy this. And now if we close it and reopen it, that buildable should be gone because it got removed from the database. Now let's make sure we can actually, let's load up some things again. So we just place this one down, place this one down, place this one down, and now we finish that, finish that, finish that. There we go. We have 3 of those. Everybody can see them. All good. Close the game. Hit play again. And as you can see, there we have our buildables. Now, unfortunately, as you can see, they are finished, but there is no information about that because we never ran any code if it got finished, because by default, whenever we place it, it's not finished. So that's going to be an issue that we're going to have to fix in a second. And as you can see, this is how it looks on the client side. Now, if we try to destroy it, nothing really works because it is not yet been finished. So let's make sure that it actually knows that it is being finished. Now, before we patch it up, I'm going to close all of these other ones, all of our extra buildables. By this point, you might be starting to experiment with saving and loading and all this stuff, and something might go bad. Some buildables might be somewhere, and you just want to remove that save completely. Now, how do you do that? Is by going to the folder where you have your project in. So this is the location for my project, and you will have a saved folder, and inside of that folder you will have your save games folder, and here you will have your slot. So you can go ahead and just simply delete that, and whenever you delete that, when you hit play, all your buildables should be gone and the save should be now empty because it doesn't really exist. So that is all good. Now let's, like I said, let's make sure that we patch up all those extra pieces so that the buildable knows whenever it has been finished. So we previously added a new interface call function, that is the set is build finished. So we got to go ahead and run that. So our event in the master event is build finished. And from here, we just simply go ahead and set this variable up like so. And then after that, we got to make sure that we do an if branch check to check this condition. And then if that is true, we want to make sure that we run our code, which does finish our build. So our multi-finish build. So I'm going to run that. So multi-finish build like so. Compile and save this. Let's hit play again. It's not going to be exactly what you might have imagined this to be because it's not going to be yet complete. So we're going to go ahead and finish it off, finish the build. So we finish this. As you can see on the clients, it is finished. On the server, it is finished. We close it off. We hit play again. On the server, it is finished. And on the client, it is finished as well. Interesting. I previously had issues with this, that it wasn't finished. Okay, this was the issue. So the saved ones were working fine. It doesn't load up the not saved ones. So that's where I had the issue before. Okay, let's go ahead and let's fix that then. And to fix that, I'm going to go ahead and create us a begin play event. This guy right here. So whenever this thing starts the game, we're going to do a switch has authority, and we only need to run this on the client, because as you saw on the server side it was working perfectly fine. It wasn't working perfectly fine on the client side. So the remote one is the client, so we're going to do an if from the client. We're going to check, is the build finished, like so. And now I'm going to copy a couple of nodes. So we have our multi-set mesh, which changes our materials to basically to the transparent ones, to the gray ones. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these nodes up here, and if the build is not finished, I'm going to go ahead and run that code. Now I need to provide an array. An array is going to be our materials variable. So it's going to look something like this from the false route. And actually I'm going to move this up a bit like so. Let's move this down. Now from the true route, we need to go ahead and run the code that resets our materials back to the default ones, and that is our multi-finish build. So I'm gonna go ahead, copy these nodes, and I'm gonna copy these to our true route like so. So now we have both the ones that change to the gray one and the ones that change to the actual ones, and now we should be good. And as you can see, we are saving these, the collisions are all good, and everybody sees exactly the same thing. So yeah, that's going to be it for our saving and loading. This might have been a little bit of a longer video. Hopefully you managed to follow through this. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them down in the comment section down below, or join my Discord. That is actually an even better way how to contact me. And yeah, that's going to be it for this one. Thank you for watching, and I see you in the next one.